Professor Bayne, how lovely to have you with us. Can you hear us?
Thank you.
Wonderful. So we look forward to hearing you.
Okay, thank you. Shall I just kick off then? Thank you so much for allowing me to give this talk virtually. I am very disappointed not to be with you in Johannesburg, but this is a very good next best option. Okay, I'm going to share my slides with you now. Hopefully you can still see my face. So my name is Sian Bayne. I'm based at the University of Edinburgh, where I'm Professor of Digital Education. I also have a role as Assistant Principal for Digital Education at the University, which is a kind of a strategic role. What I want to be talking to you about today is in line with the theme of the Symposium around the future of the university and the fourth industrial revolution. And I'm going to frame my talk around this idea of near future teaching. Right, just a second. Okay, just to give a tiny bit of context about the University of Edinburgh. I'm sure you're aware, it's a large research-intensive university, about 40,000 students. But we also have a long history now of investment in digital education and education technology. So over a decade of fully online master's programs and MOOCs, which are still a going concern, at least very much at Edinburgh. We have approaching 3 million learners now on our 50 MOOCs. So when we think about the future of education, we're thinking about a kind of really quite a rich past in the way that we've used digital education. So we're projecting forward from there. One of my roles is as Director of the Centre for Research in Digital Education at Edinburgh. So much of what I want to say this afternoon is about the kind of research base for thinking about the future of education, as well as the kind of intense practice base that we have here at Edinburgh. I also teach on our fully online Masters in Digital Education programme, which has been going since 2006. It was one of the first ones at this university. Okay. But the project I'm going to talk about most is this one, Near Future Teaching, which was about co-designing a values-based future for digital education at Edinburgh. But I'll start by giving an outline of the talk that I want to give this afternoon. I think I'll talk for about half an hour and hopefully allow questions, plenty of time for discussion at the end. If anything goes wrong with the technology, I hope that someone will shout loudly so that I'm aware, because I can see the room, but it's just a little square. Okay, so I'm talking about the near future of teaching, and importantly, around who gets to define what the near future of teaching is, particularly in relation to digital technology. The structure of what I want to say is this. I'll start by saying a little bit about the technological imaginaries of the fourth industrial revolution, the stories that we tell ourselves about the fourth industrial revolution and how we should engage that as universities. I'll then talk a little bit about some of the imagined futures for digital education, particularly focusing on some of the ways in which those are problematic. And then I'll move on to think about better ways of building different kinds of imaginaries about the future. And in that part of the talk, I'll draw on and describe the Near Future Teaching project. So that's an overview of the next half an hour. To start, I'm going to talk a little bit about the technological imaginaries of the fourth industrial revolution. I think Professor Moala gave a fantastic outline of the challenges that this is bringing to universities, and I will address those specifically from a digital education perspective. In doing that, I want to draw on a set of ideas that Edward Hamilton and Norm Friesen have outlined. And they've written a really interesting critique of the dominant weight narratives around how we talk about digital education. They say that we tend to see the digital either as something instrumental, so technology is somehow neutral, it's a tool we use to meet strategic, institutional, or individual learner objectives but it's fundamentally neutral. It doesn't change. It doesn't change things. It just makes them faster. The other way in which we tend to talk about technology in teaching and learning is very deterministic. And I like this quote from Hamilton and Friesen, where they say, this deterministic perspective is where we see technology as driving social practice and change. We have to adapt as universities, while technology, like a Newtonian god, watches unaffected as the drama unfolds. And it's particularly this second aspect of the way we speak about change that I want to address in my talk this afternoon. I want to speak against the deterministic tendency in the future when we talk about the future of teaching and learning. Those of you who are able to be there for the 3 days of this event, and I'm very jealous that I can't be, we're framing it around this idea of the fourth industrial revolution. So I do want to start with a quote from Karl Schwab, which I'm sure everyone is familiar with, when he launched the fourth industrial revolution as a theme for the 2016 World Economic Forum. He said, we stand on the brink of a technological revolution that is going to fundamentally alter everything we do. This transformation will be like anything we've experienced, unlike anything we've ever experienced before. We don't know how it will unfold, but one thing is clear, we have to respond to it in an integrated way. And I think when we read this, paragraphs like this, and this is really just an example which is typical of a lot of the discourse that's out there on the fourth industrial revolution, what to me is striking is that, while on one level, yes, it makes sense, and we probably agree with most of it, when you look at the way the language is framed, it's very much in a way which gives all the agency to the technology and very little agency to the human and institutional users of technology. So when he says, this is a technological revolution, see this a lot in digital education policy and popular publications, that this revolution is coming over us whether we like it or not. It's going to fundamentally alter everything we do. It's going to transform. It's going to be utterly game-changing, like a natural phenomenon that's kind of altering us forever. It's going to unfold in ways we can't predict. But one thing is clear: the response to it must be integrated. And I think this is where I have a problem with much of the discourse around fourth industrial revolution, is that it frames us as needing to respond to change that's inevitable, rather than us as framing, articulating and building change in a way that makes sense to us as academics and as universities. I think we see this perspective a lot in the popular literatures and also actually much of the academic literature around technological change. We see the examples of the books that I'm showing here are quite typical, that there's a race on, we have universities and society generally has to race to survive artificial intelligence. We have to race to develop ways of managing the rise of the robots and what some have called the end of the human era. All of this builds this idea that a certain direction of technological change is inevitable. And this is my favourite example of this kind of text, where we're kind of put in the centre of these kind of ferocious-looking arrows, which are the inevitable change, the inevitable technological developments that are going to force us to change. Of course, we do have to change. We know that, but to me the issue is who frames the change, who frames how the future is going to unfold. And I think that we need to be much more proactive in universities at saying what kind of change we think we should have. And the reason why that is about the kinds of futures for education and technology which are predicted for us are, I think, a lot of the time really quite damaging to the academic mission, to the social mission of universities, and to the critical understanding of what it means to teach that we work to within universities. I'm just going to pause for a second to make sure that everyone can hear me okay. Please shout and let me know if there's any technical issues your end.
Fine. We hear you well.
Thank you.
Great. Okay, that's good to know. That's reassuring. Okay, so let's look at some of the kinds of futures for educational technology that are routinely predicted for us. The first example that I hope you can see up on the screen now is this one from IBM, the IBM 5 and 5 series. So this was a series of projections of likely futures that IBM released actually about 5 years ago. And they were saying, in 5 years' time, these are the changes that will have happened. I imagine plenty of people in this room will have seen this one already. It predicts how the classroom is going to change, how teaching is going to change through the development of smart technologies, Internet of Things, smart campuses, and learning analytics. So when you read this, it kind of looks, and it is interesting. It says things like, the classroom will create a syllabus in the future based on individual learning style and pace. It says the system will level the playing field by ensuring that barriers to education become less of a factor for success. It says things like a system fueled by analytics will help teachers identify students who are at risk and suggest measures to help them overcome challenges. So what it's doing here, if you read it again, is you see that actually, where we might say the teacher will conduct a certain activity, they've taken the teacher out and replaced it with the classroom will do something, or the system will do something, or the technology will do something. And what this is, what I see this as being, is partly a discursive move which removes the human teacher from the equation and replaces it with technology. This, I think, is a very unhelpful way of thinking about the future of education. It's interesting that this particular prediction was released about 5 years ago, and although some of this has moved on, we aren't yet in this situation that I think we can say we have a classroom that can do these things. So that's one example of the way in which the teacher and teacher professionalism is eroded by these kinds of predictions of the future. Another one I want to just share with you, and I'm drawing here on the work of my colleague Ben Williamson, who's doing a very interesting mapping of educational neurotechnology and the kinds of language that is being used to describe it. So one of the examples that Ben uses is this BrainCo, which is a spin-out company from Harvard University, developing educational neurotechnology to quantify student engagement during class. What they've developed are headbands that map brain activity, and then they use that brain activity to develop real-time visualizations so that teachers can see how engaged students are in their class. So you can, anyone who's ever stood up in front of a class of students knows whether they're engaged or not. And I think this is another example of the delegation of aspects of teacher professionalism to analytics in a way which is really unhelpful. Although now I'm saying that, actually for this kind of talk, and they're giving one online, it would actually be quite useful. But generally when we're standing up in a classroom in front of people, I think this is misunderstood what the challenges for teachers in those kinds of teaching contexts are. There was a report on this technology in the Wall Street Journal last week, and a really interesting video being shared around how this technology is being used in schools, specifically in China, and the way this was affecting children. So I'd recommend you dig that out if you're interested to see more. The final example that I want to use as an example of problematic futures that are described for us is facial recognition. I think we're in a situation now where we're regularly seeing facial recognition being discussed as an approach to mapping student attendance, for example, managing security on campus and so on. Not so far implemented in any UK universities as far as I'm aware, but in a sense, to me, that isn't the point. The point is the stories that we're telling about the inevitability of this technology. So there was an article on the JISC website. JISC is the UK government body which supports educational technology in universities and colleges. They ran a series on the intelligent campuses, on the idea of the intelligent campus, and one of them was about facial recognition and how this could work. And the way they described this is that students would enter the lecture, they'd take their seat, the camera would record their face and match them with the student record system, record their attendance. The camera would then record the audience several times during the session to make sure that students were there for the full lecture. And then after the lecture, the attendance record could then be used to provide reports to the Home Office and the Student Loans Company as required. You know, this is a speculative piece of work, but I think it's problematic for that reason, in that it hasn't engaged at all with some of the privacy issues, the ethical issues around using this kind of technology. It's unproblematically assumed that they're kind of inevitable and that they will be used within the machinery of government in a particular way. And I think these kinds of futures are deeply problematic for universities. So I want to move on now to talk about alternative imaginaries and alternative ways of thinking about how, as communities of scholars, we build a future that we can align to, rather than a future which is determined for us. I want to here just draw on the future studies literature. The quote up on the screen now is from a recent paper by Sarah Amsler and Carrie Facer. They talk about the trajectory of development of future studies over the last 50 years. When future studies originally emerged, it was mostly focused on predicting the future so that we could eliminate risks associated with it. Future studies then moved on into kind of foresight period, where it was about predicting different possibilities for the future, again, mostly to eliminate risk in relation to that future. But where this body of scholarship is now is in a kind of anticipation phase. Anticipation is radically different from prediction in that it actually assumes an active and critically reflective interaction with futures. So it assumes that actually we can build ways of designing the future. And this is what I want to spend my time on for the last 10-15 minutes of my talk, because it's this idea of designing the future that drove the Near Future Teaching project at the University of Edinburgh. So this was a project which began 2 years ago. I took it on as my first kind of big piece of work as assistant principal. The brief was to develop a vision for the future of digital education at our university. And with colleagues, we made the decision that actually we didn't want to do this by taking drafts of a vision through committees, but we wanted to build this vision from the ground up by co-developing it with students and staff at this university. That's the approach we took. So I'll just explain very quickly the kind of methodology that we used for this project. I think my colleague John Turner is in the audience, and John was very centrally involved with the development of this project. And I think he has brought some copies of the report with him, so if you'd like one, grab John at the end. But this is what we did. We used a design thinking approach to build this vision and this strategy. We started by defining our problem or our question, which was, what is our preferred future as a university? What do we want the future to look like? We then moved on into a sort of discovery period where we spoke to many people across the university, and we focused on what values we want to shape this future, as well as the global trends that are impacting on it. On the back of that work, we defined a set of core values that would drive this future and a preferred future. And then we went on to develop the aims and objectives which would enable us to reach this future, as well as a set of actions which would enable us to get there. So that was the broad shape of the project over 2 years. We spent a lot of time scoping the community, talking to people. We did this by running lots of events. We ran 30 or more events that we invited academics and students to. We got them into a room to talk about the future of blockchain, for example, in universities, or the future of the Internet of Things in universities, or learning analytics. And in those meetings, we talked to people about their preferred future and their values. We did other things that were much more values focused, like a discussion group with a discussion event with the Black and Minority Ethnic Liberation Group, a creative writing workshop, and so on. So we did a lot of events. We also did a lot of talking to students. kind of grabbing them outside the main library and asking them about digital education and about the future and about how they thought the university should approach this and about their own values. These videos are all up and available, grouped into thematic, short 3-minute videos on the project website, and I'll share the link with you towards the end. On the back of that piece of work, we defined a set of 4 core values for the future of digital education. The first was experience over assessment. So students in particular were telling us that studying at university should be about a really good experience. It should enable ability to learn from failure, ability to think really big, ability to connect across disciplines. It shouldn't just be about assessment and about exams and about measuring of performance. It should be about something much richer than that. But that was our first core value. The second one, perhaps unsurprisingly, was around diversity and justice. Edinburgh and most U21 universities would say the same thing, is a highly diverse student body, very international. The sense was that any future that we build should build on that diversity and see that diversity as a resource. And it should also have a focus on social justice and on ethical action. The third core value was really about putting humans at the centre of what we do with technology, not allowing technology to drive space between people, but using technology to bring us together in new ways, put relationships first. The fourth value was much more around flexibility and participation, co-design of curricula with students, flexible pathways through their academic study and through their degrees. So these values, I mean, you can see, were really nothing to do, explicitly with technology. They're about the kind of things that we want technology to do for us as a university. And then we ran a kind of, it took us the best part of a year running a series of intensive workshops with staff and students to ask what would a near future for teaching look like if it was built on the values that I've outlined. We also did a trend mapping exercise. So myself and my colleague Michael Gallagher developed 2 very short reviews, which are also available from the website. Please do reuse them because they'll be out of date really soon. One looking at the future trends impacting on education that are kind of societal trends, and one looking at the technological trends impacting on the future of teaching. These reviews kind of revealed the things that are familiar to us all, really, around changes in the way, in the demographic, the student demographic, changes in the levels of trust in public institutions, urbanisation, automation, and so on. In terms of the technological trends, it was, again, probably Professor Mawala already outlined most of these: the rise of artificial intelligence, alternate realities, data, and so on. So none of this really was very surprising. What we did with this trend mapping exercise is we didn't just say, how are these values that we've developed going to inflect these trends? We actually said, what would the university look like in a future world which had developed according to the trajectory of the trends we can currently identify. And so to do this, we developed 4 thought experiments, 4 kind of really future-focused big ideas about what the university might look like in 10, 20, 50, 100 years from now if these trends continue. I'll just show you a couple of these before I finish, because we use these to workshop the preferred vision for our own university. The first world that we developed was one which assumes that data is driving everything we do. We see this a lot in discussion around the fourth industrial revolution and around technological change generally. So this first world was a world in which datafication drives everything. It drives all our decision making and all the ways in which we manage ourselves, our campus and our students. This is a world in which higher education is very much marketized, very much commodified. National borders have tightened, visa restrictions have become even more problematic than they currently are, and there's a high level of global competition between top-ranked universities. In this university, we imagined the University of Edinburgh in this context as being somewhere where STEM and data science was at the kind of top of the disciplinary hierarchy, and that there was a risk of neglecting humanities and social science. There would be a focus on skills rather than on academic disciplines. This would be a highly diversified sector where we'd be working with platform partners to deliver a lot of our teaching. So that's one future. I'll just show you one other one that contrasts so you can get a sense of what we did with these worlds. The second one we developed was a very different one, which was focused on climate crisis and how that might change what we do as a university. So in this future world, climate crisis drives everything that we do. This is also a highly data-driven world where, again, as with the previous one, most of the decisions that we make are based on data. Economic growth as a bottom line has moved away, and we now have a bottom line which is much more focused on sustainability. In this world, the university might look like a very impact-focused university where everything we do is about addressing crisis. Everything's about practical solutions. We can imagine we might reduce the academics' tendency to travel, for example, so develop tight local networks for teaching, as well as global alliances for research in key areas. So the other worlds that we developed, I won't go over them all now because I want to leave time for discussion, but the third one was about high levels of human-machine hybridity and what that might look like. The fourth one was about Uberification, where the rise of consumer power has been taken to a very extreme level, to the extent that universities no longer exist as universities but have become platforms. All of these worlds are available, again, on our website if you'd like to look a bit further at them. So we then continued with our workshop series, looking at these worlds and understanding how we would impose our values in these specific futures. And as a result of those workshops, we came up with these 6 concrete aims for a preferred future for our university. We want a future which is playful and experimental, where when we engage with technology, it's not only at the level of procuring large systems for our virtual learning environments, for example, or implementing lecture recording across campus. It's actually about putting technology into the hands of students and academics to build and create and prototype and hack to make their own kinds of digital education at a micro level. So that was one. The second one was to be community focused, and I've talked about that already, to be assessment oriented, so to try and limit the sense in which assessment and evaluation is seen as a burden for students and academics, and see it rather as something which is creative and outward looking. The fourth aim is to be post-digital, and by this I mean to have moved away from this idea that digital is something which is somehow additional to our everyday lives. We know that we and all our students are fully digital all of the time, but we still haven't really designed our institutions to take account of that. The fourth aim is to be boundary challenging. We want to be boundary challenging both in the sense of enabling our students to work across disciplines, but also in the sense that we want to challenge international national boundaries and continue to build strong global connections and strong global cohorts of students through distance learning. And finally, we want our future to be data fluent, not just in the sense that we create students or graduates who are able to use data, but that we understand the impact of data on our world and on our societies in a critical way. So this is the final report that we produced, which summarises all this, and hopefully there'll be some lying around in the room later. But just to sum up, yeah, that's good timing. We have time for discussion. To sum up, what I'm arguing here is that we need to move away from this technological, deterministic tendency that we see in discussions about fourth industrial revolution, but also in discussion and discourse about digital education generally. A lot of that determinism comes from corporate bodies who are developing educational technology. It rarely comes from universities themselves. I'd like to see us kind of asserting more agency over the future, using the values of our universities as communities of scholarship to determine a future that we desire. from responding to someone else's vision of the future to building our own. One of my favourite books in this area is John Urry's 2006 text on what is the future, and he says the future is definitely murky, but it's one that we have no choice but to enter, but we need to enter it in the spirit of interrogating it and hopefully reshaping it. And I will end there. Thank you very much for listening.